Well, global leaders are calling for calm after Israel's strikes on Iran threaten to spiral into a wider war. Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro condemned Israel's actions as criminal and immoral, while China's UN envoy urged Tel Aviv to halt all risky military actions immediately. Russia's Vladimir Putin strongly condemned the attacks and offered to mediate between Israel and Iran, according to a Kremlin statement. From Europe, French President Emmanuel Macron called for a renewed dialogue and a return to the nuclear talks. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and US President Donald Trump also stressed diplomacy over escalation. The two held a phone call overnight talking about the extremity of the situation and potential escalation. The UN Secretary-General António Guterres said enough escalation, time to stop. He says peace and diplomacy must prevail. And in Asia, India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar spoke with his Iranian counterpart to discuss the latest situation. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has vowed severe punishment, calling Israel's attack a satanic crime. He said the Islamic Republic's armed forces won't let them go unpunished. Oman called it a dangerous violation of international law, and China demanded an immediate halt to escalation. Turkey's President Erdogan accused Netanyahu of spreading fire throughout the region, while Saudi Arabia slammed Israel's violation of Iran's sovereignty. Tensions are at a breaking point, and global pressure is mounting to de-escalate. Well, off the back of this severe escalation in tensions between Israel and Iran and across the wider Middle Eastern region, oil prices have surged and Wall Street tumbled as tensions between Israel and Iran escalated dramatically. Brent crude settled 7% higher at $74.23 a barrel, while US West Texas Intermediate rose by over 7.6%, with both benchmarks posting their largest in-trading gains since the Ukraine war began in 2022. Markets responded swiftly to the geopolitical shock. Wall Street ended the session sharply lower, with the Dow falling nearly 1.8% and the Nasdaq losing 1.3%. Meanwhile, the S&P 500 was down just over 1%. Defence stocks jumped, but airlines and tech shares slumped in the meantime. Well, joining us to discuss all of these developments, we're waiting on that. But this is a severe escalation. The situation, of course, is a contentious one. Geopolitics, people on either side of this fence. But as we know so far, escalation has seen a dramatic increase in action between Israel and Iran. We are now joined by Spencer Critchley from the United States. He is a communications strategist joining us from California. Spencer, let's have a look at the facts and what we know. Israel's operation still ongoing. Benjamin Netanyahu has made it very clear that this operation will continue until it needs to be ended. We have seen a response from Iran. They first sent what we believe to be hundreds of drones. Now we understand that around 150 ballistic missiles have been fired, with some piercing through the Iron Dome defences of Israel. How significant is this escalation truly, not just to regional stability, but the wider geopolitics, with so many nations divided on this situation?
Oh, I think extremely significant. This is something that has been looming as a potentiality for decades now, and certainly the whole time that Benjamin Netanyahu has been in power, he's been clear about his desire to use military force to stop Iran from ever having a nuclear capability. Personally, I supported the Obama administration's approach to this. They certainly did not trust the good intention of the theocratic mullahs leading Iran, but they thought they saw a path to contain the nuclear threat while hoping to work with more moderate politicians in Iran who do exist, and hope that age and time would help to solve the problem of the totalitarian theocrats and all of their death to America, death to Israel threats. Unfortunately, with President Trump tearing up the Obama deal and not replacing it with anything else, Iran has been able to move ahead with its nuclear enrichment, and there's wide agreement among Western intelligence agencies, as well as the UN, that it's in violation of all agreements about not working towards the development of nuclear weapons. And while I am no fan of either the Trump administration or the Netanyahu administration, and I think Netanyahu in particular has been doing enormous damage and threatening regional peace himself lately, I do agree that it's completely unacceptable for Iran to develop nuclear weapons, and sooner or later, they were going to have to be stopped from doing that, and it looks like it's just come sooner rather than later.
Yes, Spencer, this situation of Iran's nuclear enrichment, the uranium enrichment towards weapons, there of course has been discourse from different nations which has been conflicting. The US, Israel saying that Iran are close to a nuclear weapon, Iran saying that it's only for domestic purposes, their uranium enrichment. Of course, we had these discussions in direct between the United States and Iran over a potential nuclear deal. Will there be some frustration within inside the US administration that Israel seemingly have taken this situation into their own hands? As Benjamin Netanyahu said, this is a preemptive strike, and there was no direct reason for this strike in terms of a countermeasure.
There'll be frustration within parts of the administration, but President Trump, perhaps not surprisingly, has instantly switched from warning Netanyahu against attacking Iran, at least in the short term, to becoming Israel's latest cheerleader in these attacks. These head-spinning changes with Trump are nothing new, and it's hard to read anything into them from any kind of long-term policy perspective. And I would expect the Trump administration will continue to be internally divided between those who want to avoid war and those who have the much more hawkish attitude and share that with Netanyahu and think the time has come when the military option is the only one.
Yes, absolutely. Also joining us on this special broadcast today is Scott Faulkner, head of the Eagle Enterprises, a security firm based in Washington. He's also based in Washington as well. Scott, thank you ever so much for being here. With a potential escalation, with a response from Iran that has seen civilian casualties, we wait for confirmation on the exact number. We wait to see if there are any fatalities, but we know that there are injuries. Given the level of response that Iran have given, what could be the next step for Israel? Do you think that they could go further than just striking these military targets and nuclear targets? Could there be a move maybe to political figures, given the scale of the Iranian response?
I think a lot of people who see Iran as a threat going all the way back to its revolution of 1979 would love to see regime change. The fact that the head of the Quds forces has now been identified as a Israeli asset who actually helped them on the inside means that there may be some very high-level individuals within the government that may be just getting tired of all the saber rattling and the funding of all these terrorist organizations from Iran. I mean, certainly the average person in Iran is totally fed up with the dictatorship. And so this would be an ideal time for them to rise up. But overall, the key is getting rid of the centrifuges. And we know that some of those are buried very deep in mountains, up to 300 plus feet, with probably reinforced concrete bunkers. So the question is that how is Israel going to get to those? Because you can blow everything up on the surface, but unless you get to the centrifuges, you're not going to permanently cripple the Iranian nuclear program.
Yes, Scott, Israel have said, Benjamin Netanyahu has said that this is now war with Iran. The rhetoric doesn't seem to be as strong from the Iranian side. What's the ramifications of all-out war in the Middle East between two of the powerhouses of the region?
The key is that while Saudi and a lot of the other Sunni countries in the region are publicly saying one thing about, oh my goodness, isn't this terrible? Behind the scenes, they're cheering Israel on. Everybody knows that Iran was slow walking and the negotiations, they were never serious. Even if a hunk of paper got signed next week, they would never adhere to it. So the only way to take out Iran's threat is either regime change or what Israel's doing right now. The diplomacy was a chimera for people who just like to negotiate and sign papers, but that's not a realistic outcome, because Iran, especially the hotheads at the very top, the Ayatollah on down, they want to be the dominant force in the region. They want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. They would like to be the point of the lance for radical Islam dominating at least their hemisphere, if not the world.
Yes, if you could stay with us, Scott. We're also joined by Jim
Sure.
Rice, Professor of International Law, who's joining us from Vigan in the Philippines. Jim, thank you ever so much for your time. There was this UN Security Council meeting held overnight. We heard from the head of the IAEA. We also heard from diplomats and voices from all of the different countries that have been involved, Western nations as well. The rhetoric was split, as we've seen publicly from world leaders too. But looking at the legality of what has gone on, do Israel have the right to attack Iran in the fashion that they have? And the response from Iran, is that proportionate, or does it justify further attacks from Israel on an escalating scale?
Thanks very much for having me on. I agree with both Spencer and Scott. I think that both of them have brought a lot of wisdom to this discussion. In terms of your question as to the legality in terms of international law and Israel's attack, well, this is extremely regrettable. I would argue that Israel has the right to defend itself under the United Nations Charter. And whether this is proportional or not it's really hard to say. I would argue on its face that it probably is.
And given the level of military capability that Israel have, we understand that their attacks, their first day of attacks, those overnight strikes in which hundreds of jets were used targeting around 100 different sites. We understand from the Israeli point of view that Iran have been damaged, their air defences have been damaged, their uranium facilities and their nuclear facilities, of course, have been damaged, but key officials as well have been taken out within Iran's military. How will Iran be placed to fight a conflict, if there is one, given the level of destruction that Israel are reporting to have carried out?
Again, without knowing the intelligence on the ground, it's hard to say. However, it would seem to me that Iran, being a very large military power, I would imagine that their chain of command is not completely disrupted, and they have a sufficient number of officers to make their response. In fact, they already have launched a series of attacks on Israel.
Yes, absolutely, Jim Rice. I am just getting some information in right now. Of course, this situation is one that continues to evolve. Some breaking news, and according to Jordan's Aviation Commission, Jordan has reopened their airspace at 7:30 a.m. local time. This comes as Jordan's aviation authority had closed the country's airspace and grounded all flights after Israel attacked Iran. Also, of course, the situation of Iranian ballistic missiles heading into Israel, a point of contention with that airspace closure too. It's interesting to understand the US response to this. And Spencer, I would like to come back to you, please. We first had Marco Rubio, as soon as Israel launched these strikes, saying the US has no involvement. Donald Trump then comes in, and then he doesn't contradict those comments, but he acknowledges that the US knew. If the US are seen to be involved in this, is there not a risk to US personnel in the region? And could this incite a further conflict between the US and Iran directly? Spencer, I believe you have to mute yourself if that's possible. Unmute yourself.
I don't know how I got muted there.
No worries at all, no worries.
So yeah, this is a huge risk, not just for the United States, but for the entire region, and by extension, the world. If the United States is drawn into this conflict and it does escalate to an all-out war, that could be just enormously serious as Iranian allies feel that they have to get involved. The disconnect between Marco Rubio and Donald Trump is another example of a great source of risk here. And again, I'm a frequent critic of the Trump administration, and it's not because I have ideological differences with them. It's my differences with them go far deeper than that. And one of them is just their sheer incompetence, which itself presents a grave danger to the United States as well as the rest of the world. So Marco Rubio was announcing that the U.S. Had no role in this, and being very careful to distance the United States from this. And within 24 hours or so, Donald Trump is boasting about the American role in it and boasting that he knew everything. Rubio's statement seemed untenable in the first place anyway, given that the U.S. had warned its key personnel to leave the region in the days leading up to this attack. And Trump has now said, as he says, we knew everything. So that in itself is a problem here. This impulsiveness, these constant changes of position are themselves destabilizing, and they put even our foes in the position of not knowing how to respond rationally, even if they are so inclined, thereby escalating the risk that way. On the other hand, I think perhaps one source of hope here is that Iran was already weaker than Israel and the United States in many ways. Just, it had its strengths, but it was not their match, and now has been very drastically weakened. And despite all its threats, I don't see, I'm not a military expert, but I don't see, looking at it from the outside, that they have the capability to follow through on most of those threats. And I would hope that their allies will hang back and not see any strategic advantage from their point of view in getting involved on the losing side.
Yes, absolutely, Spencer. Of course, Operation Rising Lion, we understand, is going to continue, and Israel continuing to look to weaken Iran. But let's just play you some visuals now from these overnight strikes that Iran fired at Israel. I wait for confirmation on the location of what we are showing you now. I'm waiting to hear that through from our desk, but let's listen in. It is clear to see from here the Israeli Iron Dome defences, of course, stopping some of the missiles, but they can be overloaded, and there have been instances where that has happened. These visuals that we just showed you from near Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, also had similar sites overnight. But we bring you some more news now relating to the over 150 ballistic missiles we believe that Iran sent to Israel, and we understand now that at least 2 people have been killed and dozens injured as Iran launched its large-scale retaliatory missile and drone attack on central Israel. Explosions rocked major cities, prompting these emergency alerts and intensifying fears of a wider regional conflict. Scott, I will come to you briefly. Confirmation now of 2 people dead. Of course, a majority of the people living in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and other areas in Israel that were living under air raid sirens and warnings were mostly in shelters. But 2 lives lost is significant. Could this be a catalyst for potential lethal weapon use by Israel?
I don't think so, because the key is that Israel is doing a surgical strike to remove the nuclear capability of Iran. Iran is retaliating on civilian areas. So it's, Israel is not going to be bombing Iranian civilians. That's just not their way. And so I think that we're going to be maybe seeing, as part of their, people are talking about this has been at least a year or more in the planning, certainly the pre-positioning of their drones, kind of similar to what happened in Ukraine a couple of weeks ago, that this is a well thought out, well planned, multi-month, if not full year strategy to say if the negotiations failed, if everyone felt that Iran was basically proceeding in bad faith, it's time to take military action and take it out once and for all. And so I think that Israel is not going to get diverted from that strategy. They say another couple of weeks of bombing. Again, we're back to the issue of do they have the bunker buster bombs, or what we call the mother of all bombs that the U.S. has to go in and get those centrifuges, because Iran can basically recover if those centrifuges are still intact. So the question is whether it's sabotage that they can do with forces inside the country, or again, a much higher level of explosions that they can do to break into those buried centrifuges. And that's going to be the key to this whole thing as we move forward.
Yes, absolutely, Scott. We are going to play another vigil just to provide some more context of the situation in Tel Aviv overnight. Several waves of Iranian attacks. This was one last night. Yo! Jim, I will come to you now. This situation is escalating, of course. We've said that multiple times. The region of the Middle East has been afflicted by war since the October 7th attacks. There's been Hamas, Houthis, Hezbollah. These proxies have been weakened. Do you think that this was the perfect time for Israel to strike as they did? And why did they choose to use such force? I want to allude as well to what Scott said earlier. These targeted attacks from Israel have reportedly hit Tehran and led to civilian casualties, including women and children. So there is, of course, collateral damage and collateral death, which is expected in any strike of this magnitude. But a provocation of this kind, using the strength that they have shown, is this a clear intent for Israel moving forward over the next weeks and months about how they are going to deal with the threat that they see around them regionally?
Well, Thanks for that question. I'd like to pick up on one or 2 points that Scott made just now. One, in terms of the capabilities of the bunker buster bombs to go in and take out the centrifuges. My question, something that I don't know, is whether Israel had somehow determined that Iran's refinement of uranium or fissionable material was about to reach a certain threshold, and that's what prompted the action. The other point that Scott mentioned, though, is that when you basically go to war over such an issue, that alone will not deter your adversary. What I think Israel's best hope here is to hope for, the people rising up, as Spencer has suggested, and throwing off the totalitarian mullahs that have beset the country ever since 1979. But in terms of your point, Joshua, I agree with you, but the Middle East has been beset with war and instability, really ever since 1948. And before then, we've had innumerable wars in 48 and 56 and 67 and 73 and 82 and so on. So right until this day. So we're going to need a lot more in order to get peace and stability in the Middle East.
Jim Rice, thank you very much for joining us. I also want to thank our other guests, Spencer Critchley and also Scott Faulkner, for being here. This is an evolving situation, and we will be here to bring you all of those updates across the day. We'll also bring you the rest from across the world as well. But for now, that's all we have time for. Thank you.